One of the first characteristics that come to mind regarding the Jewish community is how distinct most of them are. So, how did Jews achieve such immense wealth? Were they wealthy throughout history, or did they reach this level starting from a specific period? In today's topic, we will discuss these questions. This video covers everything from the principles written in the Torah to the rabbi viziers working in Muslim palaces, and from the narrow streets of Europe to the magnificent billboards of New York. We will explain this entire process with historical evidence of the stages of Jewish enrichment. To trace the origins of Jewish wealth, we must delve into the deepest parts of history. Our starting point is 5086 BC. In those years, the Jewish kingdoms in Israel were conquered by the Babylonians, and the people were sent into exile. Until this period, Jews generally made a living through agriculture and mining in their own lands. However, with the Babylonian exile, they began to develop themselves in the fields of trade, finance, and administration. For example, the Murashu family archives from the 5th century BC document that many Jewish families in the Dnieper region were engaged in banking and money lending. These business sectors were both more profitable and provided higher income with less physical labor compared to agriculture and livestock. Moreover, these commercial sectors were supported by their book of rules, the Torah. The Torah forbade charging interest on loans among themselves, but specified that this prohibition did not apply to foreigners. In other words, the Torah legitimized not taking interest from fellow Jews while allowing it from others. Jews who previously had no opportunity for interest-based transactions in their own kingdoms due to their faith were now living with thousands of people of different origins who did not share their beliefs. This created the opportunity to lend money with interest. Jews were not only exiled by the Babylonians. After the Babylonians, they were driven from their homeland by the Roman Empire and scattered across the four corners of the world. This exile meant that Jews could conduct trade in every corner of Europe, Asia, and Africa. The geographer Strabo clearly stated the extent of this expansion by noting that Jews could be encountered at every point in the civilized world. Indeed, during that period, crowded Jewish communities lived in major cities such as Antioch, Alexandria, Athens, and Rome. Despite this dispersion, Jews managed to preserve their original culture while adapting to the communities they lived in. Roman sources record that Jews were involved in all kinds of commercial activities. As merchants and artisans, they quickly succeeded in acquiring assets and becoming wealthy wherever they went. However, their success was not limited to trade. It spread to many different activities. For example, they took on various roles in gladiator games, one of Rome's most popular events. Many Jews worked as gladiator managers, which was one of the most profitable jobs in the sector. In other words, they bought gladiators as slaves, trained them for the arena, and earned great profits this way. We can think of this profession like the talent or sports agents of today. Based on this, it is not difficult to understand the high amounts they earned. By the end of the ancient era, Jews gained the competence to mediate in all kinds of commercial transactions through the business sectors they entered. In addition to their own language, they had learned Greek and Latin. In an era where literacy rates were low, the Jewish faith's requirement for every male to be literate made them an educated minority. The education they received provided them with important privileges such as bookkeeping and drafting contracts. Consequently, in addition to their commercial skills, the close communication they established with state leaders allowed them to obtain various privileges. These competencies in the ancient era formed the foundations of the global finance and trade network they would establish over the centuries. The Middle Ages represented a period of exile and exclusion for Jews on one hand, and a process of becoming acquainted with trade and new business sectors on the other. After the 7th century, with the rise of Islamic civilizations, Jews continued to live under Islamic rule. For centuries, Jews lived in peace with Muslims within Jerusalem and the Umayyad state of Al-Andalus. Although Jews continued to be involved in trade and finance during this period, we see that they also played influential roles in administrative affairs. For example, Samuel ibn Nagrila, a Jew, became a vizier in Granada in 1027 and held this position for 30 years. This situation is the most concrete example of Jews occupying high-level positions. The fact that interest was forbidden in both Christianity and Islam provided a great economic advantage to Jews. Many wealthy Europeans in need of money sought out Jewish moneylenders. The fact that the primary occupation of Jews in England, France, Germany, and Italy in the 12th and 13th centuries was moneylending is a result of this situation. However, their activities in the Middle Ages were not limited to this. When Mediterranean trade was interrupted for Westerners, Jewish merchants called Rodanites, who acted as bridges between the two societies, came to the fore. Historian Eliyahu Ashdor states that because the Rodanites were not directly tied to any state, they were perfect intermediaries between the Christian and Islamic worlds. The trade networks of these merchants extended from Spain to China, and they played active roles on the silk and spice routes. However, these gains and the permission to lend money with interest turned into hatred against Jews in Europe over time. As a result, they were collectively expelled from England in 1290, France in 1394, Spain in 1492, and Portugal in 1497. Although these repeated exiles damaged their existing trade networks, they also led to the establishment of new networks in new regions. Despite everything, Jews managed to re-establish the world's strongest commercial networks wherever they went. One of the critical developments in this period was the refuge of Sephardic Jews expelled from Spain and Portugal in the Ottoman Empire. These Jews settled in cities such as Istanbul, Thessaloniki, Edirne, Izmir, and Bursa, forming large communities. Unlike in Europe, they were not confined to ghettos and moved freely thanks to the Ottoman millet system. They became pioneers in fields such as trade, banking, jewelry, medicine, and printing. In fact, they were the ones who established the first printing press in Istanbul in 1493. Additionally, Jewish gunsmiths coming from Europe supported military power by providing advanced technology weapons and gunpowder to the Ottoman army. When the center of trade shifted from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic with the Age of Discovery, Jews were among the first to notice this change. When their return to England was permitted in the 1650s, they became active in the London finance market. They played a major role in the establishment of the Dutch Stock Exchange and the birth of the East India Company, especially in England and the Netherlands. In the following centuries, we see some Jews in Central Europe serving as court Jews, providing financial consultancy and war logistics support to rulers. Figures like Samuel Oppenheimer took on critical roles in the Austrian and German courts. These individuals transformed the moneylending traditions of the Middle Ages into modern banking. Considering the massive share of banking today, it is not surprising that those who laid these foundations reached great wealth. In the 19th century, great banking dynasties like the Rothschild family appeared on the scene. The business started by Mayer Amschel Rothschild quickly turned into a network surrounding the major cities of Europe. They had a say in everything from lending to states to railway investments. For example, in 1815, this family largely financed England's war expenses. This success inspired many other Jewish banking families, leading to the establishment of a global financial network. However, conditions were not perfect for every Jew. At the end of the 19th century, around 2 million Jews fleeing oppression in countries like Russia and Poland emigrated to America. Those who first arrived in America were initially poor people engaged in crafts such as tailoring. However, a generation later, they became powerful in trade and academia. They showed their greatest impact in the newly developing media and entertainment sector. While other investors approached these areas with hesitation, Jews, who had managed gladiator games thousands of years ago, recognized this potential. The founders of giant studios like the first half of the 20th century represents both a peak for Jews, with the emergence of geniuses like Einstein, and a great catastrophe brought by anti-Semitic policies. After the war, America became the center of Jewish social advancement. Jewish names gained weight on Forbes lists and in the management of giant companies. In addition to giants like Levi Strauss and Goldman Sachs, media channels and the cinema industry were shaped by Jewish executives. Today, although Jews are a small minority of 15 million worldwide, their economic and cultural influence is far beyond this number. Historically, the source of this wealth is not just a desire for gain, but the value given to knowledge, solidarity, and commercial experience passed down from generation to generation. They have managed to preserve their capital and accumulation of knowledge through schools and institutions. We have come to the end of our narrative examining the enrichment process of the Jewish community. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow new content.